Welcome back to the Steps to Soul podcast. I'm Brandon Bourgeois, my co-host Christopher Sater here today. We're going to discuss a topic that we got proposed by a listener, which is how do I sell my business fast? The most basic question every business owner wants to know. Can I get it sold and how fast is it going to take, right, Chris? They feel like it's almost sometimes similar to real estate. Show up, put a sign in the front yard, selling your home, and it's gone, right? All these competitive bids. But however, there's a lot of reasons why it won't. We're going to dive in one today, which is the value gap. Why owners think their business is worth more than what buyers are willing to pay for it, and why it will really slow down the sale of your business if you don't get in alignment with market expectations. Every week, Chris, we get that same question: how fast will my business sell? Can you give me an estimate? But really, it's about pricing reality, correct, bud? It's real simple. If you're not in alignment, it's going to be a lot harder, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Most owners assume speed is going to be about how fast you can market, exposure, and getting the right buyer through the door. But in reality, timelines are usually determined whether expectations, the seller's expectations, are going to match not only buyers, but also lenders. And it's not leaving lenders' expectations, it's what actually lenders will do. When all those things align, deals are going to move. Then you can talk about speed and getting things done efficiently.
Yes.
But when you've got this value gap that we're going to be talking about today, they absolutely do not. The process is going to slow down regardless of how strong a buyer you get to come into the door, how great your bank is, because even if the business development guy at the bank wants to get the deal done, he's all on board. It's going to go up the chain. It's going to go to credit department. It's going to go to the CEO if it's a regional local bank. They are going to shut it down if it does not pass what it needs to pass as far as pricing.
You are not wrong. A lot of times we have to tell business owners and buyers, the price has to meet market expectations. And a lot of times, we're going to dive in a little deeper, and it's tough because owners really want maximum return. We understand that. And buyers want what's considered a fair price. But that gap sometimes can be very small, right on point, or as you know, Chris, it can be wildly different. And some of that also depends on the timing of going to market, what industry you're in, what your timeline to get out is as a seller will set your expectations, and also the speed at which some buyers want to move. As you and I both know, some buyers want to move really fast. Some are going to take a little bit longer time just because you start bringing in private equity, family offices, strategic buyers. All these little variables make a difference. But you and I both know if you're not in alignment or close to it very early on, it's very obvious why some do not sell and will never probably sell because that expectation can never be overcome. So let's define this. What actually is the value gap? Let's make it in clear English, right, Chris? The value gap occurs when the owner has perception his business is worth X based on what he thinks it's done. And buyer perception is, what is my risk, and our favorite word, transferability, going forward? What can I expect to buy, and it will repeat what it's doing? If not, and is there optimization, right? The favorite words of buyers. Can I optimize this company? The gap exists when the owner has spent, and you and I know this, Chris, years built in this business. One of my favorite words, the sweat equity multiple is not real. I get it. We own our companies. You see the hard work it takes and you feel there's value there. You've got long hours, personal investment. You've made the sacrifices. You've built a brand. But the buyer looks at it as, what are my future earnings going to be? Can I transition this? Are there any knowledge or concentration issues that we've mentioned? And the price you want, if it's even reasonable, like you said it best, can we make debt service? Will a lender or conventional lender, SBA lender, make this deal work? And that's where a lot of times I think the biggest issue is not that the hard work is being valued fairly. It's, can you actually get the price agreed upon that can be serviced? And I think often that's where I think our biggest hurdle is helping buyers and sellers get that deal done. What do you see in the value gap as the biggest highlighter or I guess I would say the one thing that really drives that gap wider and that's hard to correct?
Well, it comes from, the value gap really comes from looking at the same business in two different ways. Mm-hmm. Owners are naturally looking backwards. You mentioned the sweat equity. They know what they've put into the business. Buyers are looking towards the future. A lot of times sellers, we tell them what their valuation is. They accept it. They understand it. But guess what? They want to go up from there. I'll give you an example. The other day I was talking to a guy who owns a financial services business. Mm-hmm. Worked really hard on the valuation, came up with $800,000 ballpark. He agreed that was the valuation, but that's not what he wanted to go to market with. He wanted to go to market with a price above $1 million. And that's kind of, he just, just because that's what I want. I understand the value of my company is $800,000, but I want this. That's where it's going to take so much longer to get that business sold. Yeah, we can go up a little bit on price to have some negotiating room and just, start a little higher. Buyer understands they can come in with a lower offer. But when you go above 20, 25, 30% above the valuation, what happens is you shrunk your buyer pool because some buyers are not going to even walk through the door if your business is priced so high that they don't want to insult a business owner. I get that a lot. Have you heard that? Hey, I don't want to make an insulting offer. And if you think your business is worth north of $1 million and I think it's worth six, seven, $800,000 at best, I'm not even going to come in and offer that. Neither perspective is wrong as far as the way the buyer looks at it and the way the seller looks at it. But I'll tell you this, the market is going to ultimately tell you what the business is worth. Businesses based on buyers looking forward, that's where your business is going to, that's what your business is going to sell for. It's not going to sell what the broker told you the valuation was, what you want because of sweat equity. It's going to sell for what the buyer thinks the value of it going forward is.
You're not wrong, and what they're able to pay for it. And I feel sometimes owners get mad at that logic, but it's true. If you want to sell your business in the fastest way possible, you hit a lot of key points. Get the prices close to market multiples is reasonable. If you want to add 10, 15% bump to give yourself some wiggle room for any kind of correction, so be it. Everyone knows, like buying a house, there's a little bit of negotiation. You got to have good financials. You got to clearly outline any red flags or risk and make it clear before you get to due diligence. And also make sure that it meets debt service. I mean, we stress that time and time again to owners when we've gone through these battles of what's it worth, what's it not worth. And I finally say, okay, if your business is worth, let's say, like in your case, $1 million, does it meet debt service? And I run the debt service on the typical SBA loan and I say, for under a $5 million deal, it's like, no, it doesn't. Why would someone do that deal if they can't make a return on it and can't be financed? And often that's when I finally get people to look at the gap, especially sellers, and go, okay, I get it. It's not even realistically attainable because we can't even finance it. Now I know, well, someone might want to pay for it. You're right. Someone might. One in 10 million might want to do that. You know the odds of finding that person is and actually getting that deal even done if that's the case? Slim to none. Slim to none. So how do you align these issues? How do we, when we've talked to the sellers and we've brought this observation in, when these options align and we've gotten the buy-in to what the financing can be, we've gotten to buy in what the value is, it increases buyer confidence, right, Chris? When a buyer sees a well-priced business and they know it can be financed, and you can advertise SBA pre-qualified, or you can say it can be underwritten, you want to see your number of multiple leads increase. It's going to increase exponentially because buyers are looking for those deals specifically. They know some people are always going to have outrageously priced stuff or things that don't make sense for them. But when you price it appropriately and buyers' confidence increases, your timeline is going to shrink and negotiations are going to be smoother. Instead of fighting over, for example, your financial services company you mentioned, wanting just $1 million just because. If you just price at $825, I bet you get 5 people and right away putting around $800. You could pick the better buyer. But if you overprice it, you're hoping that 1 or 2 show and you can get some competition, or you can at least get some different perspectives of value. So now you're almost stuck taking the offer and the only one you can get. You've handicapped yourself. And it may not be for that much more value, all said and done. And if they don't get that in alignment, the listing's going to sit, buyers disappear, you as a seller is going to get frustrated, and you're going to complain. It's like, well, again, the price is wrong. I'll give you a great story. I think I mentioned in a previous podcast, but it relates so well right now. A seller came to us with an automobile repair shop. They got an evaluation done a year or 2 ago. They put it around $550, $600, grossly overpriced. Cash flow's been $120 to $160 year after year, no property included. We told them 300 is probably the sweet spot. If you start there, we're going to get activity. Guess you got a full price offer and acceptance in less than a week on the market. We did, because a strategic buyer in the industry saw it and said, if it's semi-absentee run and those numbers, he said, if those numbers line up for the offer, we're good to go. Boom. Got the numbers yesterday, verified a good bit, working to close. When you price it appropriately and you have reasonable expectations and you're willing to make decisions, your timeline shrinks. That gap between buyer and seller was almost none, and it was perfect for that situation. I'm not saying every deal is going to be that way, Chris. You and I both know that. But at the same time, when you price it right, you do good diligence, you come in with a proper understanding and allow us to help you set proper expectations and annotate when a previous expectation is wrong, as in that bad valuation, the seller's going to get what they want. And in a timeline they didn't think was even achievable. So let me ask you this. Why do you think owners overestimate value? I know we kind of hit around it, but what do you think is the real core reason why they overestimate? I think that's debatable, but what is your logic there?
One, they're emotionally tied to it, right? They
Yep.
just feel like seven figures sounds a lot better than six figures. Let's start there on
It
that
just does,
price
right?
level. Yeah. The other one is it's the one last payday, especially for a lot of owners. It's the last time they're
Hmm.
going to cash a big check. They're not willing to walk away for what they could earn in 1 or 2 years. I get that a lot.
Hmm.
You hear that all the time. Hey, I could work for another year or two and make what you're telling me my business is worth. Well,
Yep.
you know, that's clearly
That's
what you
reality.
probably should do, and then you need to sell. At some point, you got to sell. And I do that. I work that math out. Well, what if you run the business for another 2 years? You take what you think you're going to make at a sale right now, and then what if by the time you sell, you've run out of energy over the next 2 years because you want to sell now, and now at the end of 2 years, your business is worthless or close to it. You just worked 2 years for what you could have today, 2 or 3 years.
Hmm.
I'm putting a two multiple. I'm talking about a
Yep.
low multiple business, but it could be three, four. It doesn't matter.
Hmm.
So that's kind of what I see as the when buyers have confidence, it's going to shorten that timeline, like you said. And the one reason is because they aren't spending all these months trying to reconcile what you're asking with the numbers we've given them.
Hmm.
And so that's why you see these shorter timelines, I think.
I'll say too, a lot of owners focus on revenue versus profit. They get caught up in, I've been making this much money or I made
Yeah.
so much money in the past. And it's like that ship has sailed. Historical financials are important, but if the number is declining, you've got a problem. You can't say what you did or what may have happened, or you have to acknowledge that your peak years may have changed too. And often that goes back to the sweat equity multiple I joke about. I get you worked really hard, and no one's discrediting that. But is it transferable? And is it worth what it's worth now? Would you get on a ship that has holes that are starting to open up every day, or would you rather buy a ship that's in great shape, tuned up with a warranty? That's how a buyer is going to look at it. It's one of the hardest conversations to have, right, Chris? Because you don't want to. It's hard to tell someone their last payday, and a lot of times for smaller businesses, that is their retirement plan, is far less than what it's going to be worth. On the flip side, if you can still run it and sustain your quality of life, keep doing that. If it's not the number you want to retire, we say that all the time. I think the biggest problem I see, besides the seller sweat equity effect, is the neighborhood sold for more. Or my friend sold for this. If you don't have the closing docs and the financial recast, you can never claim that's what they sold for. You and I both know everyone overinflates what they sold it for. And quite frankly, there's always a lot of contingencies, especially you get into the lower middle market and there's rollovers and trade equities and stock options. That true number value really isn't decided for a lot longer what the actual multiple paid was. And let's be honest. I don't know how many times I've seen somebody throw in the real estate value and say they got paid 10 times. Well, the real estate made up 3 times of that 10 times. So they really didn't get paid 10 times.
Yeah.
Because
True
here's all the
story.
comps that say it didn't happen. Those are different businesses, right? I mean,
And one,
how often
I
do you
think,
see a seller? Go ahead.
yeah, no, I think one of the worst things, or near the top, is when you get a buyer through the door that actually offers what the seller has overestimated their value. They come in, they haven't done their due diligence, or they just feel like buying this business, or they want to make an offer on it. So they make that high priced offer. Now you've got the seller's expectations up. I've been here. The seller's now, oh, well, I'm validated in my price. Business is worth this. What happens though eventually? That goes under financing. And now the bank's telling the buyer, no,
Due
you can't do this
diligence.
deal for this amount. In fact, I just did this back in August, went through this deal. The buyer was willing to pay this really high price that the seller wanted. Got to the bank, got to underwriting, had some risks on it. And I had told my seller, I don't think you're worth this, but we can take it to market if this is what you want to do. And it wasn't too far off, but I thought it was on the high side. And sure enough, there was no bank. He went through 9 banks. No one was going to touch this deal for that.
Hmm.
And then I think you know what happened, but the business fell apart because he lost customer number one. That was the risk, customer concentration.
There you
So
go.
by being overpriced and it taking a little bit longer to find that buyer who was willing to pay that price,
He lost opportunity.
yeah, you did. Not it's not going to happen to everyone. That's a one off, but
No, but it's just a case study to show people this can happen to you. And it's an unfortunate side effect of realities. You don't know when the next natural disaster is going to hit your company, or the next person that you bought as your client or customer is going to get bought out by somebody else and change providers.
that's
It
right.
does happen. And I point back, owners always they live the lifestyle out of their business. It provides lifestyle for their family, their vacations, they run expenses through the company. A lot of times owners get caught up, I've got all these things in there, all these expenses, but I don't itemize it. Well, I know you're telling me it's there. I had this conversation about 2 weeks ago, another seller, promotional products company. We take all the cash out and we run all our trips through it. I'm like, is it all itemized? Well, we have to work on that. I'm like, if it's not where I can absolutely verify that add back, I can tell you the lender's going to go snip. So I'm not going to put in the valuation because you can't tell me it's provable. I'm not going to assume and inflate the value that knowing we're going to have to reconcede on that issue. Because you and I both know, Chris, if you overinflate SDE or EBITDA and then it gets into underwriting and it starts getting slashed, the buyer starts saying, I'm overpaying. And rightfully so, to some degree.
Yeah, for sure.
Not always the case, but rightfully so. And I maybe are a little too conservative sometimes, but I'm trying to be in that very narrow ballpark, that window to say, this is why we valued it here. We're not going to throw inflated SDE out the water on our ads. So when people see it, they know we priced it right. It brings legitimate buyer conversation in the door quickly. And as we related back to our original point, how to sell your business in the fastest way possible, that's part of the problem. Making sure alignment happens at all 3 stages of a deal, from valuation and listing to sourcing buyers to going through underwriting, due diligence, and finance. And that's where a lot of these hiccups begin. And that's where your timeline really gets stretched. The listing and then the diligence phases. Valuation phase is not that long if you provide stuff in a decent time. It really isn't. But too many owners just think, I drop off my books, it's done in a day, it goes on the market, I get an offer in a month. That's not reasonable, especially when you don't get that gap between buyer and seller confidence close. So let me ask you, Chris, what do you think buyers really, really value when they go to look at a deal, and what they would value that would cause, or at least in the seller's mind, create that gap in value between them and the other party?
Yeah, what creates the value for a buyer is predictability in all things related to that business. Can I predict the revenue? Is it going to stay stable? If there's risks in the business, they're going to start pinging away at the value of the company.
Mm-hmm.
The stronger offers tend to come from very predictable businesses. Sold a pest control a couple weeks ago. 40 years old. Basically, for the past at least 10 years, he's had almost the same revenue, slight growth, ups and downs a little bit, but within a very small range. You talk about a predictable business. Cash flow's the same. Financials all look the same. Same employees for 20 years.
Beautiful.
There were some risks there with the employees being there for 20 years because they're now a little bit older. And so the buyer was a little bit concerned about that, but he was in the industry, so not too concerned at all. But yeah, predictability. Yeah, he absolutely saw the value of that. That is such a quick sale, such an easy sale, beautiful sale. Great financials, great seller, great buyer. Just everybody understood the rules of the game. Even sold for more than we were asking because of earnout and structure and all that stuff. Yeah, the seller's making a little bit more than he even expected to. So that really, really turned out well. What are some of your thoughts as far as where buyers really see value or where value is lost in the gap?
I see the value is lost in ego and owner dependence. I've seen time and time again, we get an owner in there, they are the business. If they're not the business, they're very important. And that's going to happen on your lower Main Street deals and some of your lower middle market deals. It is what it is. It's part of business. Businesses start typically as one person or 2 people, and that main guy is the driving force of the company, as many people know listening. The problem is when the owner doesn't want to acknowledge how dependent the business is on their knowledge or their concentration of skills, and then secondly, their ego attached to it. I've seen more deals get the price lowered in a quicker fashion because the owner sat there in the meeting and didn't tell us how important he was and really downplayed his role, right, Chris? And then we get in real buyer discussions, and all of a sudden, what was a 30-hour week for the owner is really a 50 to 60-hour week. And you go, this is not how you represented the business. This is not semi-absentee. This is a legit full-time gig. You did, I had so-and-so this. Excuses, no. As an owner listening, this is very important for you. If you work a large number of hours in the business, you need to itemize your roles, how much time you really do spend in that company, even when it's off hours, even if you're at home doing work. We need to know exactly how much time you put into this business. That is crucial for us to calculate for evaluation and for a buyer to assess their risk and transferability of your role. Based on how much work you do may depend on your earnout, depend on what a buyer has to structure for compensation for you to stay on longer. The better you itemize and present this to a broker, the better chance you are of getting the company sold. Nothing is worse than thinking the owner does X amount of work and find out really They do way more, right, Chris? I would stress it to all you listening. That is a huge issue to identify and really push on to make sure you understand it. Very often, I put 40 hours in. Now, come on, Chris, you and I both business owners. It's never 40 hours. There's always things on the weekend. There's always things you're working on. I'd say too, man, one of the biggest issues I find is lack of systems. And I know that's a very generic term, but nothing I hate more than how do you get X problem done, owner? Well, today it goes to me and I have all this knowledge here, or I so-and-so I don't know what they do. It kind of gets bounced around the office, whoever's available. It's like you don't have a clear organizational structure of how certain customers and procedures are handled. Is your business really transferable? That's where your extra hours as an owner are being put into. And that's where a buyer sees risk. Risk creates lack of transferability. Lack of transferability creates what, Chris? A lower acquisition price.
Yeah, for sure.
It even can be transferred because the lenders then say, like in the business you were speaking about just a moment ago, my bank said can't do it. There's too much there. We just can't control that. We can't risk that workflow. What else would you see as a factor? Or what else do you think buyers really harp on that we haven't touched yet? I know there's more, but maybe another key one or two that you think is, for the folks listening, highlight this.
Well, I had one yesterday. I did a showing on a business. The owner's family, and I'm not just talking about a wife. I'm talking there's 4 family members in the business. That creates real risk. And what a buyer sees is what a buyer sees. A buyer asks the question, are your family members willing to stay? And the answer was yes. But you got to understand in the back of their mind, they're like, the day I buy this business.
For everybody, right?
Yeah.
I know my son's going to stay just because. I mean, come on.
Yeah, exactly. You got to assume family members are going to leave. They're loyal to the owner right now, and maybe they need a job, but they don't need a job with you if you're buying the company. And so that's a real risk. It's a value gap as far as, it's just something that needs to be addressed. And it always is if that's the case, but it's going to create value gap. If you got too many family members in the business, you're going to have to take a lower value. It may not be significant. It may not be huge. But in fact, I talked to a plumbing company yesterday. There's 3 brothers. They all work in the business. They are the top management. And so, yeah, you're selling the company and
a lot of concentration.
It's a lot of concentration. It's a concentration of knowledge. There's no number 2. It's the number 2 is a brother, and number 3 is a brother. And so, yeah, that's going to be a challenging one if it goes forward.
So let me ask you this. You made a great point. There's a lot of family members in that company. What do you think the likelihood of correcting that would be? Would it be employment agreements for multiple ones before close? When would you bring that discussion in for those buyers listening and sellers? This is going to be a key issue for any buyer coming in saying, how do I approach this deal? Because typically you don't talk to employees and management before the sale closes. But in this case, if they're that important and they're in the family, you kind of have to cross that bridge a little sooner, don't you, Chris? And offer some kind of employment agreement or something to make you feel, especially for a lender's perspective, right?
You have to cross that bridge before anything else is done. As a broker, my job is to make sure complete transparency is provided. So as soon as the buyers walk in the door, they say they're interested in this listing they've seen online or through me directly. They filled out the NDA. Literally, probably on page 1, page 2 of the executive summary, it's going to describe what the ownership structure is right now. It's going to tell you what each owner does in the business. Mm-hmm. And it's going to tell you which ones are willing to stay for employment agreements and which one want to head on to greener pastures and go do something else in life. And so you're going to have that knowledge along with my valuation, along with the asking price. And it's not going to be something that you come back and later retrade on because you found out, a month in after you finally we finally had a buyer seller in-person meeting. And now, I didn't know this. Well, you're asking this, so I'm going to lower it by 30%. No, you've known from day one. That was provided in the value. And if you want it to move forward, that's how I protect sellers. I've got some clients I meet with and they're worried about that kind of information or totally different things coming out. And my advice always is to put it right out front. Yeah. If you got a customer concentration issue, if 60% of your revenue is customer number 1, that's advertised on page 1 of the SIM, the executive summary. That way it's coming with the asking price and you can either choose to move forward or not, but this is our expectations. What have you seen? Yeah, go tell me what you've seen.
I've seen that, but I want to make one quick point to you. Goodwill and trust make deals go through. And
for sure.
Highlighting that early, not only you said you're protecting the seller, you're really protecting the buyer.
That's right.
The buyer knows before he invests time, energy, money into doing a deal, he already knows these red flags. When he goes to the lender and pitches to get the term sheet, he's not having to go back to the lender a month later and say, hey, we didn't realize we need to restructure the entire deal. You're really doing the buyer a massive service more than the seller. Yes, the seller is being made aware, and we're accounting for that in the valuation, as you mentioned. But man, if you're a buyer, nothing is worse than finding red flags down the road that should have been and easily could have been disclosed, or reasonably should have been assumed could be an issue and not highlighted. Props there, and I think buyers and sellers out there listening, take that case study with a grain of salt. That's very important to look for and have discussions on early. Like we said, before you look at financials, before you move much forward. If you don't think you can buy a family business with family members, not that's a concern of yours, don't start the process.
Great
what
point.
I've seen, the biggest problem I see when that occurs or similar situations is the speed of the deal immediately begins to slow down. Doesn't matter if you price it right, you get them through the door, and you don't set expectations properly. It can immediately, the gap can spread after even pricing. We can maybe price it properly based on what we're told, but selling fast versus selling slowly, it can change dramatically when those key elements aren't highlighted, as you mentioned. I want to dive into that. The value gap is large when real buyers, and they're going to disengage, or they're going to feel like their expectations weren't fairly set. When that happens, a buyer typically does one of two things during the deal. They either get over it pretty quick and move on forward, or you and I've seen it too, Chris, the emotional engagement begins to decrease by the day. And they don't want to tell you outright they don't want to do the deal because they don't want to give up either because they put in time and energy into it. So what do? They start finding excuses, red flags. They start getting disenfranchised. They start slowing down on response time. That's when you know the gap to getting it done is opening and probably not going to get close because you can see it coming pretty quick once information like that wasn't disclosed comes out. That means the business is going to stay on longer. It means, and a lot of times the seller wants to reject reasonable deals because they feel like now their expectations are hurt. There's a lot of ego and, there's a lot of stigma that can come from that and reduce interest. And I always see, in my personal opinion, the best thing we can do, as you said, highlight it early, get it out there, have the discussion. You can price it right. Even if it's overpriced, you need to have these key red flags identified. All that being said, how do we fix those problems? It boils down to really how good of a job does the broker and advisor do of identifying, highlighting, and then what, Chris? Finding solutions. It's not just finding the problem, it's also knowing how to solve them. For me, the most important step, and I want you to give your most important step next, is mine is getting the valuation correct from the starting point. Every broker, I think, would agree with me, or at least in some capacity, this is 1A or 1B. You've got to get the valuation as close to possible to go to market and hope the seller is willing to go with that price. Because you said earlier, some want to bump it up, but you got to have that price set because if the buyer comes in and asks our opinion, it's like, yeah, I know the seller wants this. Here's the multiples are. Make your decision. And that's not stabbing the seller in the back or not being unfair. That's saying this is what the multiples have been and why they are trading here. And a good buyer is going to say, why should I overpay just because the seller wants me to overpay, correct?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And you made a great point that buyers often become, I think you used the word disengaged when the value gap suddenly appears within a deal. Mm-hmm. This is why for sellers, I'm kind of deviating from our topic here today, but it's a very good point. This is why it's so critical to have more than just one timeline in your LOI. So if you go under LOI, if you go under contract with a buyer,
yes,
you've got to have timelines because you're going to see this time and time again where all of a sudden the buyers become disengaged. I love that word. And you don't understand why before the LOI, we were sitting here talking back and forth every day, every hour, trying to get this deal worked out. And now we're into the deal. You've got us under contract. You're on exclusivity. Why is suddenly things taking weeks or even a couple weeks to get done? Mm-hmm. If you got timelines of, hey, this has to be done by here, this is the next deadline, and I'm talking about deadlines like due diligence is started. Mm-hmm. Are they sent their due diligence list? Are they done with due diligence? Or surveys are done or appraisals are done? Anything like that. That way, as those deadlines start passing, you can give them some grace. There needs to be some grace in all deals. But as weeks and 2 weeks go by, you as the seller have the opportunity to say, I don't think this buyer's engaged anymore, and I want out of this deal. I don't want to tie up the next 3 months while I'm really looking to sell and I'm really interested in selling my company, working with this buyer who doesn't seem to be aggressively pursuing this anymore. Very, very important. Very important.
You're right. And that's where good brokers help close the gap by getting proper buyer feedback and honestly deciphering the coded language sometimes. I've had a lot of buyers give me all the different buzzwords and key phrases, Chris, and it's like, well, let's get to the point. Why are you saying this? That's some of the hardest part of the job to do is really kind of know when to prod a little and say, hey, look, I know you said this, but based on our last 3 conversations, this doesn't line up. Why did this shift? And getting buyers and sellers to understand that is, and same goes to prying on sellers sometimes too. Like, hey, your language shifted. What's the shift for?
That's true. So true.
I also think too, risk positioning and seller education fall in the next two major things that I always trust in my team. Position the business so that it makes sense, set expectations, and highlight the issues we think are going to be problems for a buyer to get through. And I want to have that conversation very early on with the seller, and then when a buyer comes through the door, have the same conversation. If you're not in the industry, you don't understand it, here are the three major risks. If you don't think you can handle that, you need to find another deal to do. That's not that you aren't qualified, but maybe it's not the right fit for you. And the same I'll dive into next is seller education. A great broker and advisor, like last week's podcast, we're going to tie a little bit that in right here. Understand how buyers think, how sellers think, how lenders evaluate deals, and what drives value. And when a good advisor and broker can educate a seller on that and get them to buy in, it doesn't mean they're always going to, but you get them to buy in and structure that deal appropriately. I mentioned the auto shop earlier. We got under contract quickly. That makes a very big difference. And it makes, to sellers listening, this is very important. Listen very carefully here. Take notes. Buyers like when brokers price things appropriately and you listen to them because they know we're going to have to guide the transaction. And if our first step to meeting them and dealing with them is that we price the business appropriately, we allocated proper risk, they're going to feel much more confident to do something with you. The goodwill is there. Nothing's worse, and I've heard horror stories from buyers where I was dealing with this other broker and he didn't tell me this and this and kept the financials really held back and didn't really disclose anything. And then I got in and I felt like I wasted 3 months. Or this company made me sign 2 NDAs and it took me 3 weeks to get in front of the seller. And by the time I got there, I found out he was the business. A simple answer would have been, he is the business. I would never would have bought it. I'm not looking to buy the owner with 2 employees. I need a company or I need a structure. That is where our job is so important and saves time, energy, and resources for all parties involved. And that comes out to the very point of keeping that gap small. You want to increase the gap? Start having buyer and seller waste money on resources to get the deal done. Paying accountants, paying attorneys, paying lenders, paying appraisers. That's part of the gap too. It's often not discussed or probably is visible up front, but let's be honest, Chris, how many times have we seen parties get frustrated and the gap grow because they feel like their cost is going up and they're not getting closer to a deal being achieved?
Yeah, for sure.
So Chris, simply, we've kind of talked about timelines. We've kind of hit on a bunch of great points, but how would you tell an owner early on, before you go to sell, how do you close that gap? Because let's be honest, buyers typically aren't too far off in price. So a lot of this falls on the onus of the owner. How would you close a gap that you think, the expectation? Say someone came to you, let's put a hypothetical here, a year out from selling. Let's say it's a trade service business, HVAC. They're looking to sell. They're going to hit a sweet spot. Let's say they have $500,000 to $1 million SDE. What would you tell them right now to close that gap? What would be the advice you would give them and how you would tell them to, if they need to restructure, they need to make changes, what would you give them? What would say, hey, sir, if you want to sell in a year for an appropriate price, here's what you need to do, and here's why.
Yeah. First one, if they aren't already doing this, and if they're in a business of that size, they probably have this in place, but I would make sure that they...
You're surprised. I bet I know where you're going with this.
I would make sure that they... Yeah. I would make sure they improve their financial clarity, even if they hadn't in the past. For the next 6 months, 12 months, however much I can get, please make sure your financials, your revenue's in the right buckets, your expenses are in the right buckets. Let's stop with all the crazy add backs if they're coming through, the owner living through the business. Yeah, it may be a little too late if we're working with the last 12 months, but let's do what we can. So this last P&L that we provide says, hey, this is what the real business really does. Is it going to help 2 and 3 years ago or a complete mess? No. But at least it's going to give the buyer some confidence of, hey, due diligence for trailing 12 months is this. You talked about it earlier, processes. Document those operational processes. If they're all in the business owner's head, you've got to get those down on paper. You've got to spread that knowledge out to other people in the company. That's going to help reduce the ownership risk. Reduce that owner dependence. That can significantly increase buyer confidence in the business. Those are my top 3 things: financial, documenting operational processes, and reducing owner dependence. What can you add to that list that would be a big factor in kind of closing that gap?
Honestly, I would tell them, if you haven't ever broken out your customer list and really understand how diversified it is, because often a lot of people in the service business, for example,
for sure,
you have service, maybe you have some installation, but really break it down. Where are you? If you can geopoint your customer base, how many of your customers are in a certain market? Like say you're in New Orleans, you could be going from Kenner to the West Bank to Chalmette. Where is your trucks? What is your average truck timeline going to your customers? Where are your customers really concentrated? Are you just taking any call anywhere because you want to get volume, or are you, hey, we're working really hard to keep Metairie, Kenner, in the center part of Orleans Parish is our base. So our trucks are never more than 45 minutes from the next stop. You'd be surprised how many good, sophisticated, strategic buyers are going to look at that and say, hey, where are your trucks really going? Are you really maximizing your time on the road? And the other item I would say is, if you know you want to go to market sometime in the future and you're of that size, you're going to be bought up probably by a strategic buyer, somebody already in the industry. Understand what software they're using and start implementing those software or items you need as far as processes to optimize your company to help with transferability and data retention. I would say there, and technology makes a better way. Look at your technology. Are your systems good? Are your programs good? Are they compatible with someone else's? Are they transferable? Or is it bookkeeper Joan in the office keeps all the spreadsheets for all the invoices and it's not really in your QuickBooks? Well, if that's the case, it needs to start going in QuickBooks, or you need to start having a better tally system to account for all these invoices. We've seen companies with multi-million-dollar EBITDA who delete their invoices and don't keep records of that. You would be surprised out there listening. So make sure the record keeping is better too. You mentioned taking the owner discretionary stuff out, but just the other basic stuff. Make sure it's alignment. Make sure you can track it down, verify it, understand it from your customer base. All those little small things is where the multiple can grow for you and where the value can really, you can find alignment there with a buyer. Because those are the items that aren't always easy to identify on a P&L or on a tax return. That when we dig in is where there can be a gap issue. And you may say, well, yeah, I look how much business. I know I do all this business. That's great, but you can't quantify, identify it, and label it and share it. So is it real? It's real, but it's disorganized. It's like dumping a puzzle out on the floor and all 10,000 pieces go everywhere. Do you want a buyer to build that puzzle, or do you want to present them the puzzle already completed? Right, Chris? That's how I like to metaphorically explain that. Would you want to put the puzzle back together, or would you rather have it be presented already completed? Take away room for problems. Buyers prefer it. Sellers need to do it. Again, we'll leave on this note. Buyers pay for future cash flow, right, Chris? They pay for transferability. They appreciate the effort, but they're not going to pay you specifically on your effort. Then there's always a gap, right? There's always some gap in belief and value. Everybody wants to get the best price, which means there will be some, let's say, for lack of better words, a little bit of competition to get there. If you price it realistically, prepare it properly, and you understand that there will be a small gap, but you can work in that gap, you're going to sell that company realistically. You are. No matter what size you are. This applies to the smallest deal to the largest deals. Pricing gap matters. And when you already start on a negative foot and it's too big, when you don't want to have tailored expectations, it's never going to sell. And I'll leave you with this case study, Chris, and you can let me know what you think. We had a person call us wanting to help sell their trucking company in school. He's asking $2.5 million for it. Do you want to guess what the cash flow listed on the ad was when he did it himself?
200,000-300,000.
60.
Hey, that sounds right to me. I'll buy it.
Yeah, that's why it's been posted, reposted. And he called again. Hey, I need help. And we're like, no, you're not even. We're past the point. We already told you our opinion, and you don't want to. And we asked, do you want? No, I think I still want. No, can't help that. That makes us look completely incompetent, and also it's completely absurd.
Yeah. Yeah, that guy just needs to go buy lottery tickets. That's about what that is.
Or just not doing it. I mean, it's. But you got to have all these contracts and value, but you're not producing income off of it. That's the problem. That's the issue we face. I will leave on this note too. Probably the hardest industry to do that for, Chris, is construction with the WIP. How much work in progress is left? Because every buyer, and here's where the value gap will get expanded. Maybe we should have said this, but I just happen to have a brainstorm. When that WIP is $10 million throughout the year and it's shrinking as your deal goes by, that's your value getting lost. That's cash flow being, especially if you're not replacing those contracts. So for those out there who do a lot of construction or project work, make sure your WIP is perfect and you've got new business being locked in. Trust me, you'll never get there.
Yeah.
Any final words for you?
No. Well, I'll say one thing. The value gap is so extremely common, right? We see it day in, day out of what sellers think their business is worth, what buyers are willing to pay. It doesn't mean either one is wrong. It just means they're different perspectives. And the faster those perspectives can align, the faster the deal is going to move. So back to our lead topic, how fast can I sell my business? It's as fast as you can get your perspective in line with what buyers and lenders are willing to do.
And that's why we encourage you to speak to someone like a broker, myself, or Chris, or someone else a year or two or three before. Be prepared and understand. And if you don't, you're not ready, you don't think, you're not sure, find out what you're worth. We can give you comps and say, this is the last 5 businesses like yours that sold for. It's not just our opinion. Look, this is what the buyer market's going to bring to the table. So if you really don't like these numbers, you have 2 options. You can improve the business to get that obtained number you want, or like Chris said earlier, work a few more years, do what you want to do. That's okay. No one is going to be upset with you. Just don't upset yourself by not finding that alignment, because trust me, it will bite you in the butt if you go to market and you do not get yourself prepared. And same goes to buyers too, Chris. We've seen buyers come in, I never pay more than 2 multiple for something. Well, good luck finding the perfect business then, because good ones trade for more than that, I promise you. And by the way, no business is perfect. Sorry. Just saying for disclosure here. None's perfect. We all have our flaws. I think that's all, huh, Chris? Did we miss anything?
I think we hit it all.
Perfect. Well, on that note, we appreciate the question being sent in, how to sell my business fast. We hope we covered at least one element of that. We'll touch on it more throughout the next couple of episodes as well. There's so many different dynamics to it. We didn't want to get bogged down into generic talk. So to find out the next portion of that, stay tuned and subscribe for the next episode. I am Brandon Bourgeois. That is Chris Crusader. We will see you next week on the Steps to Soul podcast.